The NFL draft has always been one of my favorite parts of the college and pro football seasons. So the concept of seeing which college players might go where and who ends up carving a role for themselves in the league is really one of my favorite parts about sports in general. The stories each player and team has to tell. This year's draft in Detroit will probably be one of the most memorable when it's all said and done, because you got a really strong receiver class, you got a really strong offensive line class, and that's sort of taking the backseat to the interesting amount of quarterback-needy teams that are going to be in the top 5 and really the top 10 in general. So, of course, the number 1 overall pick isn't in question. Like we know, Caleb Williams is going to Chicago. But everything else after that, might be. So here you go. Straight from the mind that brought you the actual worst NCAA tournament picks of all time. It's the actual worst mock draft of all time. Side note, as I'm sure you've realized, none of this is scripted. I'm just making this up as I go. So it may seem disjointed in some areas. Please forgive me for that. But without further ado, let's get started with pick number 1, the Chicago Bears. It's going to be the quarterback at USC, Caleb Williams. This is probably going to be the easiest projection to make in the entire draft. They just traded away Justin Fields for a 6th-round pick to the Steelers. They need a quarterback. In comes one of the most talented quarterback prospects of all time in Caleb Williams. I don't think his personality is a problem. I don't think you can actively look at this guy and say he's going to be a locker room issue or he's too much of a diva or so on and so forth. People who say that just don't have friends in Gen Z. Caleb Williams is going to be just fine in Chicago. And I think the sooner that Chicago fans open up to that, the sooner they're going to be running around with an all-pro quarterback on the roster. Next up, the Washington Commanders with pick number 2. You could go Jayden Daniels or Drake Maye here. I'm going with Drake Maye, quarterback out of North Carolina. I have to admit the reason why I'm thinking that is because they literally just traded a North Carolina quarterback that they drafted a couple of years ago to Seattle. So out with one Tar Heel, in with another one. Maye is very raw because he's very young, but still, I don't think he's as raw as some of the quarterback prospects in this draft class. I'll get to that later. I think he probably is QB2. I don't think you need to overthink it. Drake Maye to the Commanders, pick number 2. Pick number 3, New England Patriots. This is another one. I think they could trade down, and I think they're going to try to trade down. But at the same time, I do think they stick and pick and they take Jayden Daniels, the quarterback out of LSU. Got rid of Mac Jones, starting over, new head coach, new everything. Get yourself a quarterback that you can roll with and then try to figure out the rest of it from there. Pick number 4, the Arizona Cardinals. Now, there are some people that think that the Cards are going to trade down out of this spot. I thought that the Cards would probably trade down out of this spot because they have holes all over their roster. But if Marvin Harrison Jr. is just there and he's the greatest wide receiver prospect we've seen since Megatron, probably, I think you stick and pick with Marvin Harrison Jr. I think you have another first-round pick, figure it out. Everything from there sort of becomes interesting. But, there's a generational prospect at pick number 4. I think you take him. I mentioned a trade earlier, and this is where it's at. I get the feeling that the Chargers realize they have a whole bunch of holes in their squad. New head coach in Jim Harbaugh. I think they're going to trade down from pick number 5 instead of taking Malik Nabers here. And they're going to trade with a quarterback-needy team that has 2 first-round picks. And that team, to me, that makes the most sense is the Minnesota Vikings. Kevin O'Connell, their head coach, is a guy who likes strong-armed quarterbacks and who thinks he's going to be able to coach them up and teach them. And that, to me, is J.J. McCarthy. I don't personally feel okay with J.J. McCarthy going in the top 5. I know Michigan fans would tar and feather me for saying that. But I do think at the end of the day, you're a quarterback-needy team in Minnesota. You need a strong-armed guy that fits your head coach and what he wants to do. J.J. McCarthy is right there. I think they trade up to take him, and I think they're really excited about that selection. Now on to number 6, the New York Football Giants. I have them taking Malik Nabers as the best player on the board. They could take an offensive lineman like Joe Alt. I just think it makes more sense for them to grab somebody else to help on the offensive side of the ball, because that offense in New York, tons and tons of wide receivers, and none of them seem to break out ever. Malik Nabers should change that, because he's just that electric of a prospect. You can play him inside, you can play him outside. He's great after the catch. He should help out Daniel Jones a lot. They could take a quarterback. I don't think they will if J.J. McCarthy's already been taken by pick 5. So I think they're just going to stick and pick and take the best player available. The Tennessee Titans get Joe Alt to fall into their lap. You have probably the best tackle prospect in the game right now, falling to pick 7 because a whole bunch of teams ahead of you needed quarterbacks and receivers. If you're Tennessee, this is like a dream come true. Don't even really need to think too hard about it. This guy's a plug-and-play left tackle or right tackle, really. I think you can play him in both. But honestly, I think Joe Alt at pick 7 to the Titans makes a lot of sense. As does Atlanta Falcons at pick 8, taking Dallas Turner, the edge rusher. I know Atlanta has a lot more holes than just edge rusher. They filled the need at quarterback by taking in Kirko Chains, but I do think the NFL is one of those leagues that you can't have enough good edge rushers, and the Falcons certainly didn't have enough good edge rushers last year. Getting Dallas Turner in the first round, someone who probably could go anywhere from pick 4 to pick 10 in a normal draft. Here you go. Grab a guy in Dallas that's really solid. Move on to the next pick. And the Chicago Bears, they get a really solid receiver prospect in Odunze to just land at their feet again. This draft and having great receivers fall into their laps, Odunze lands here. And I think the Bears are in square position to win the draft from day one, just by landing a great quarterback and a great receiver, and I think Odunze does that for them. Next up, the New York Jets, and here's where I think it gets interesting, because I love Brock Bowers as a prospect. I think pound for pound, he's probably the second or third best player in this draft, not named Marvin Harrison Jr. or Caleb Williams, but he's a tight end. I don't necessarily think that matters. I think you could play him anywhere on the offense as a playmaker. Like you could line him up as a receiver, and he could do damage there. I think the thing is I think Aaron Rodgers needs more help in New York, and I think Brock Bowers provides that. I don't think you really mess up anywhere in the first round as a team if you take Brock Bowers. I think he's just that good of a prospect. He's an additive for every team he could possibly go to. Next up, the Chargers, pick 11. They traded down with the Vikings for this. And Olu Fashanu is right there. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, Jim Harbaugh is going to want to take a player that he coached last year. He probably will in round 2. He's probably going to take a really solid Michigan player in round 2. Probably overdraft him, but he's going to be solid. But the thing about it is like Jim Harbaugh knows Olu Fashanu is good. So he's going to want Olu Fashanu on his team. The Chargers need offensive line help badly. I'm a Chiefs fan. I cannot tell you who the tackles are other than Rashawn Slater. I cannot tell you who the other tackle is for the Chargers. And they are bleeding talent just about everywhere on that squad except for quarterback. Get them a nice offensive lineman in Olu Fashanu. Don't think twice. Moving on. The Broncos. This is an interesting one because the Broncos could trade up, or they could trade down, or they can stick and pick and take an edge rusher, and that's what I have them doing here. They take Latu out of UCLA. He's a guy that has been fastly rising up draft boards as one of the better edge rushers in this class, and Denver is in a division now with very talented players, very talented offensive lines, especially with Olu Fashanu going in the previous pick. Got to get another edge rusher, and Latu, I think, is that. Then we get to the Vegas Raiders. I think Vegas is in a very similar situation to Denver. Either you trade up to try and get a quarterback. That becomes impossible. Maybe you trade down, get more picks, get somebody like a Michael Penix at the beginning of the second round or late in the first round. I think they stick and pick here, and they take Taliese Fuaga, the tackle out of Oregon State. Very solid prospect. Another plug-and-play type of guy that you can set in and really expect to be a phenomenal offensive lineman for you for at least the next 5 years, probably longer than that, though. Next, we get to New Orleans, and they will have been trying to trade up to take a tackle this entire time, and nobody will let them do it, at least in my brain. So I think they're going to be able to stick and pick here and take J.C. Latham as the next best tackle off the board out of Alabama. Are they maybe upset that they don't get Olu Fashanu or Joe Alt? Yes. Does that really matter as much with J.C. Latham? I don't think so. I think Latham is a very solid tackle prospect. That is an upgrade over some of the players that New Orleans currently has that aren't named Ryan Ramczyk. So I think that's another one right there. Next up, Indianapolis Colts at pick 15. This one is interesting because they could take a receiver or they could take a cornerback, depending on what they see as the bigger need in the moment. But if you have a 6'5" receiver on the board that's a burner in Brian Thomas Jr. with an absolute monstrous catch radius, you get him to help your quarterback. You get him to help Anthony Richardson because, that man needs help on the offensive side of the football. He's phenomenal when he's healthy and when he's playing. You now get him essentially mini Megatron. Look out, AFC South. I know you have a problem at the cornerback room, and this is a very tight cornerback class. But I think the second you get that to work out for you, and you take a very solid receiver like Brian Thomas, you've just completely upset the power balance, I think. And I think that's going to be something that they're going to look to do. Next up, pick 16. You're going to notice I have Troy Fautanu listed as an offensive lineman instead of an offensive tackle as he stays in Seattle for the Seahawks. There's a reason for that. Some places list him at 6'3", some places list him at 6'4". I think he's a tackle, personally. But I think Seattle is in a position where all they have to do is just take him and say, all right, where are you best? We'll play you there. Are you best at left tackle? We'll play you at left tackle. Are you best at right guard? We'll play you at right guard because he has the capability to play all of those positions. And Seattle does need help on the offensive line. They take someone here who can literally play anything except for center. In fact, I think he actually probably did play some center. I might be wrong about that. You play him anywhere on the offensive line and he's already an upgrade. You just stick him there. I think that's a phenomenal pick for Seattle, and they'll definitely be happy to have him there. Next up, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Here's where I think our first major cornerback comes off the board here with Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. I'm going to be honest. I did not have him as a first-round pick until the Combine when everyone started talking about how fast he was. I'm not sure exactly how good of a cornerback he is other than being fast. So we'll see if this is a good pick, but he does seem to have thrust himself into that squarely in the middle of the first round conversation. Jacksonville needs a corner. If they see Quinyon Mitchell as the top corner in their board, they're going to take him. So there it is. That's going to be the pick there for Jacksonville. Hope you're excited there, Jags fans. Next up, we actually have another trade. The Eagles are going to trade up with Cincinnati specifically because Quinyon Mitchell came off the board. They really want Nate Wiggins. They really want Nate Wiggins in this draft. So they're probably going to jump the Rams and the Steelers and the Dolphins. All three of those teams can probably take a cornerback. I have probably the Steelers as the main one that's going to take a cornerback there. Cincinnati, of course, doesn't need a corner. They really need interior defensive line. And so they're probably going to take a step back, look at the teams behind them, say, yeah, we can probably afford to trade back here and take a defensive tackle. So they're going to trade back to pick 22. The Eagles trade up to pick 18. They take Nate Wiggins. On to the Rams. Rams are an interesting team because they have a few needs across the board. I'm going to have them taking an edge rusher here, Jared Verse out of Florida State. A while ago, Verse was considered edge rusher 1. Don't know what happened, whether he had a very tough season as he got double-teamed a lot or something like that, but he has fallen considerably down the draft board process. Maybe he didn't test very well at the Combine. I'm going to be honest with you. Don't know too much about Jared Verse other than stuff from last year. So here he is now, pick 19. The Rams are excited they get him. He should immediately help out a defensive line that just lost Aaron Donald. I know the Rams could also take somebody like a Tavondre Sweat, some other interior defensive lineman. I think that's all on the table. Like any defensive line player is on the table for the Rams right now, edge rusher or D tackle. So we'll see what they decide to do. Maybe they trade up, maybe they trade down, whatever. Next up, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is an interesting one here. I think they could go interior offensive line, or they could go defensive back. And I think they're going to look at the board, recognize they can maybe trade up in the second round to get a guy like Cooper Beebe out of K-State, who's a very solid guard, instead of getting a Graham Barton right now. And they're going to select Terrion Arnold out of Alabama. Arnold is one of those guys that I think you can play at safety, at nickel, or at corner. And I think that flexibility is going to be a huge thing for Pittsburgh's defense, something that they're really going to need a lot of help with. So I think they just take the guy here, decide what they're going to do at offensive line in the second round, and move on from there. Next up is the Miami Dolphins, and they're going to be the landing spot for Graham Barton. The Dolphins are one of the most electric offenses in the league when Tua's not getting thrown to the turf. I think they really need either a center or a guard. I think Graham Barton fits both of those. They'll be able to plug and play him just about anywhere on the interior offensive line, and he will succeed there. Next up, Cincinnati. They traded down, remember, and they're going to take Byron Murphy II. So Byron Murphy is a very, very talented defensive tackle, very good disruptor, and I think if you watched Cincinnati games last season, aside from the fact that Joe Burrow was hurt, you will notice that they had a tendency to have poor defensive tackle play sometimes, especially with the depth being the way it is. Next up, the Chargers. Remember, they traded down again. Man, you really need a solid wide receiver to succeed in this league, and they skipped out on taking Odunze. They skipped out on taking Malik Nabers earlier. Now they get Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy is one of the most electric prospects in this draft class, especially at the receiver position. Very, very fast, set the combine record for speed. But he's also really good after the catch. He's a great deep threat. He's not just John Ross. I think a lot of people are scared away by the speed and the fact that he's very thin, and they think he's just going to be John Ross again. I think he's going to be better than John Ross, but he needs to get coached up a lot. I think you give Justin Herbert a deep threat, like a legitimate deep threat, in Xavier Worthy, and I think they're right there, back to being the annual AFC West offseason champion that they have been since like 2007. Next up, the Dallas Cowboys. This is an interesting one, man. Like I honestly did not know what to do with the Cowboys. I feel like they have a whole bunch of like small additions they could make, but no real first round, like this is the main issue. Like I look at their roster and I don't really see any holes. But I know Cowboys fans have been talking about how the fact that they need a new tackle, at least for next season when Tyron Smith is gone. Amarius Mims. Like that's the best I can think of here. Mims is a tackle prospect that probably needs a year to slowly develop, and he needs a really good offensive line coach before he steps in to be an all-pro level. I think he gets that opportunity in Dallas. He's a very talented, physically talented player for the Georgia Bulldogs. I think he just needs some time to grow and develop. And you look at what the Cowboys have done with Tyler Smith over the last couple of years. A lot of people say Smith should move to tackle. I think he should stay at guard. I think you grab somebody like Amarius Mims who can play tackle and start moving forward from there. Next up, the Green Bay Packers. For some reason, I cannot tell you why, but for some reason, it just feels right for Cooper DeJean to go here. And I struggle. I see I've listed him at safety and cornerback. I struggle to list him in a defensive position because I think he can play anything, honestly. I think he can play edge rusher at like 195 pounds. I think he can do it. I think he can play linebacker. I think you can play a really cool linebacker. I think you can play him at safety, of course. I think you can play him at corner. I think you can play him in the slot. He can play anywhere. And he's a really good kick returner. He's like instantly Green Bay's kick return one. Like I think if you look at that Green Bay team, they have a lot of different holes filled already. But I think if somebody like Cooper DeJean falls to them in the first round, I think they're like, sold. We want him. Bring him in. All right. So this would be the Buccaneers pick. But you'll notice I have them trading. And the reason why I have them trading is because the Lions are trading up. The Lions jumped the Buffalo Bills to select Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. The Lions need another receiver to place on the outside to help out Jared Goff, Jamison Williams. Amon-Ra stays in the slot. But, like, seriously, you grab somebody like Adonai Mitchell, instantly the Lions are once again favorites to win the NFC North. And you jump out ahead of the Buffalo Bills to grab probably the last true round one receiver prospect in this draft in A.D. Mitchell. So I think this is a big-time move, and the Lions are big-time movers. So either they trade down or they trade up, and I think they trade up in this draft. They jump a few teams to take A.D. Mitchell, and they're very excited with that selection. Next up, Arizona. I have them trading down again, or at least, no, not again. This is the first time they're trading down. Sorry. I have them trading down with the Denver Broncos, who desperately need a quarterback, and they're going to want that extra year. They're going to trade back into the first round to select Bo Nix, the quarterback out of Oregon. Bo's a little bit on the older side, but I think a lot of teams value his experience. He's been a starting quarterback for like 5 straight years, I want to say. Very solid track record at both Auburn and Oregon. I think Denver's going to respect that. They did just trade for Zach Wilson. I don't think that matters. I think they're going to want to try to take a quarterback in the first or second round of the NFL draft here and see where that leads them. And I think Bo Nix is the guy they're going to end up with if they aren't able to trade up earlier in the draft. Next up, the Buffalo Bills. They stick and pick with Troy Franklin. Franklin, for some reason, just feels like a very Buffalo receiver for me. Stephon Diggs, that whole situation was interesting. I don't really think Buffalo ever had the opportunity to help him as much as they should have. But here they go. They go back and take a very speedy receiver. 6'3", I believe, 180 pounds, very thin for the position, but I don't think that affects his play style all that much. He hasn't really been injured in college, and so you get a guy that, if you're worried about anything, you're probably worried about the size, and that's about it. That's the only reason why he's not a top receiver prospect in this class. I think the Bills are happy to have him. They keep him away from Kansas City and Baltimore, and they get somebody who might be their new Stephon Diggs. Next up, the Bucs. Remember, they traded down. I had them taking Jackson Powers Johnson, the offensive lineman out of Oregon. 3 straight Ducks here. That was not by design. JPJ is an interior offensive lineman, could play center. I think the Bucs desperately need an interior offensive lineman that can step in from day one and be a starting center. The difference is I think typically in the NFL, you don't see centers go in the first round all that often. You see starting centers get drafted, like Joe Tippmann in day 2. I think it's going to be probably more so for this year's draft that they get drafted in the first round like Graham Barton did, because I think there are a lot of teams that really need a solid interior offensive lineman, and I think JPJ is that for the Bucs. Next up, the Ravens. It feels like they're always drafting an edge rusher in the first round because they draft a very solid edge rusher that everyone's excited about, and he ends up being good. Not great, good. And sometimes, after a couple years, he goes back to being okay. Once again, I have them doing the same thing they did with David Ojabo. They draft an edge rusher. I think Chop Robinson out of Penn State makes a lot of sense here. Very solid athlete. Can play standing up or down. I think he's going to be one of the better edge rushers in this class when it's all said and done. I think Baltimore sees the need at edge rusher, and they take it because all the round 1 receivers are pretty much off the board. They stick and pick. They take Chop Robinson, and they're happy with it at the end of the day. Next up, your Super Bowl runner-up, San Francisco 49ers. Man, they need an offensive tackle. They take Jordan Morgan out of Arizona. Morgan is another one of those guys that has slowly started to creep up draft boards, and he has for a while. He has a lot of starts under his belt at the tackle position and has done a lot of growing in the last couple of seasons. If you look at his stat line from when he was just getting started with Arizona, he had some bad games. Like, he was not good. But the amount of growth he has done over the last just 2 or 3 seasons. He was injured for most of the season. I can't remember if it was a couple seasons ago or 2 seasons ago or 3 seasons ago, sorry. But he came back from that very, very well and performed very good for the Arizona Wildcats. I think he's one of those prospects that is going to go at the end of the first round. Would not be surprised to see him go in the 20s, actually, as one of those prospects that kind of surprises people. but I definitely do think he's going to be one of the tackles we see before the end of day one. San Francisco is very happy to have him. Next up, my Kansas City Chiefs. Listen, man, you go out and you grab someone like Hollywood Brown. Receiver isn't your number one need anymore. You have Rashee Rice if he can come back from whatever problem he's doing legally. And you have a few receivers. Patrick Mahomes has just proven that you don't need receivers to win a Super Bowl with him. He's just proven that. So I don't think receivers are number one need. I think this receiver room he's going into next year is better than the one he had last year. But if you look at the offensive line, I don't think he has a real tackle right now. I really don't. And so I think they stick and they pick and they take Kingsley Suamataia. I really need to learn how to pronounce this last name because I really am convinced that the Chiefs are going to try and grab him. Out of BYU, very solid offensive tackle. I'm pretty sure some of you guys may remember when he had originally signed on to play for Oregon as a 5-star, immediately transferred to BYU. But he's been very solid, very good body of work. And he's young, too. I think at 21 years old, can be a franchise left tackle. The Chiefs desperately need a left tackle. Wanye Morris is not doing it. In fact, I think Wanye probably is better suited for guard. And maybe the Chiefs think so, too. Maybe they don't. But I definitely see the Chiefs taking an offensive tackle here in the first round or trading down. I don't think they really need a receiver all that much. They're going to take Kingsley here, and they're going to go with it. And that's going to be their 32nd pick of the NFL draft. All right, so, of course, as is the case, this is going to be wrong. It's going to be very wrong. But the reason why we do mock drafts is because it's fun. It's a great thought exercise. And so I want to know what you guys think of my mock draft, where you think I went wrong, where you think I needed to change some things, so on and so forth, and who you want your team to take in the NFL draft. Obviously, the number one player I want my team to take, the Kansas City Chiefs, the number one player I want them to take is Ben Sinnott, because Ben Sinnott is great, and he's basically Travis Kelce. No, I will not be answering any questions at this time. But, yeah, this is my mock draft. We'll see how right I am here in a couple days, or how wrong I am, as is the case with me. Have a good one, guys. Stay safe, and enjoy the NFL draft. We'll see you guys later.